Hello, and welcome to Quality Time, the podcast made just for Nebraska's early childhood providers who are growing every day through Step Up to Quality. I'm your host, Laura Katie. Whether you're tuning in during snack time, cleanup, or your drive home, we're so glad you're here. Each episode, we shine a light on the real work happening in early childhood programs across Nebraska, because quality is something we built together. Today, we're talking about something that comes up often in classrooms and homes: how early literacy connects with digital literacy. With technology becoming such a big part of our world, how do we use it in intentional ways that support children's learning while keeping developmentally appropriate practices in mind? I'm so thrilled to welcome today's guest, Suzie Fogarty. Suzie brings a wealth of experience in early childhood education and has been deeply engaged in exploring how literacy and technology connect to children's learning and development. Welcome to Quality Time, Suzie. We are so excited to have you here. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thank you, Laura. I'm so honored that you asked me to be part of this very amazing project that you're working on. A little about my background. I have been in the education ecosystem for about 25 years. I have a bachelor's in secondary education. I was a high school history teacher for about 10 years, and then took some time off to raise my kids, and then got into the nonprofit world, always working with kids, either at Teammates Mentoring Foundation, or I worked at the North Star Foundation. I really love mentoring kids, inspiring kids, and now just happen to be working for Smart Gen Society as the community outreach coordinator. And I get the wonderful opportunity to go out and continue the education component and teach kids, empower kids how to stay safe in a digital world.
Ooh, that sounds interesting. You're interesting as well. That's wonderful. So can you tell us a little more about your current role? Because I'm very interested. I'm a curious cat, so
A lot of times people ask me, why did I get into this area? I was working at Phoenix Academy and working with the fourth grade classroom when our executive director had asked the former CEO of Smart Gen Society to come talk to us. And I was hanging on every single word that she said, because as an educator, I got to see and have a set of lenses of what education and students looked like before technology was introduced to the classroom, and then after.
Yeah.
And then having raised 3 kids with technology and cell phones, she brought up a really, really interesting question. And that was, parents, do you feel that you have the knowledge to really raise kids in a digital age? Do you think that the tech industry, the computer industry has helped us in guiding our kids? And I think for a lot of us, we felt no. We were just given this technology, but not necessarily the resources and guidelines. And that's what I was really interested in, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing when I gave my kids a smartphone for the first time. And so that's why I tell parents a lot in my parenting presentations, do as I say and not as I did. I made a lot of mistakes because I just didn't know. So I really wanted to get involved with this work and go out and talk to kids too about how I love technology, but it's a tool. It's a tool to enhance our lives. And I just wanted to help educate kids on how to stay safe too.
I love that personal connection, though. I can see you teaching and hearing something, and it's like, yes, I'm interested in learning more about that. And as a teacher, I imagine you are a lifelong learner, and so it's really cool that you've been able to learn something new, but then also share that information with others. So that's super interesting.
Thank you.
I have a feeling we're going to learn a lot from you today. So let's go ahead and dive in. There are so many mixed messages out there about young children and screens. It's a sensitive topic. So some advice will say no screens at all. Other messages suggest maybe that it's fine as long as it's something educational. So from a research perspective, what do we actually know about the impact of screen use for children birth to 5?
We know that screens play a major role in our daily lives. With that said, for children, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time from 0 to 2. We know that this time period in a child's brain development is just essential for brain growth. And one of the things that early research is starting to tell us is that screens are delaying some of those early developmental things that are really key in forming language and or vocabulary, which then we know go on to form literacy skills. Sometimes, Laura, I don't know about you, but I almost think that the phone is becoming the distractor from parents having these really rich conversations with their kids. And from 0 to 5, we have to think about not only those interactions with our kids, how really essential and important they are for their language development, but how we might need to be very proactive in the time that we have that time with our kids. We have more two working parents than we've ever had in the history of this country. We have phones that are constantly trying to grasp and keep our attention. We have almost everything on our phones when it comes to our daily lives. So when we do have these interactions with our kids, we need to make sure they're very rich. And when it comes to screen time, we know that nothing can take the place of a caregiver in that one-on-one communication. Kids don't interpret language in screens the same way they do face-to-face. Did you know that?
I did no.
I just read that in a study. Kids interpret, they hear the language, but it doesn't go to their brain or their minds when they're facing a screen. But if they have the interaction back and forth, that engagement piece, that's what's essentially important for vocabulary.
Okay, so that is very helpful. I'm thinking a lot about my nephew. So fun fact, I moved home because my sister had a baby during the pandemic. And so Ishmael is now about to turn 5 years old. But I have witnessed many of these moments, and I have myself as an aunt been very guilty of, wanting to take a picture of him or wanting to take a video and then showing him. And then, and as he's getting older now, he's really interested in learning about dinosaurs or learning about, can I see a monster truck and things like that. But it's just really, it's got me thinking a lot about just the language piece and the interaction, and also just kind of the distraction, because I feel like I always feel a little bit like, he's looking at me and he's asking me a question and I'm kind of listening, and so I think it's one of those things where when you know better, you do better, but it's also, it's just really challenging. It's really, really challenging.
Yeah. And kids learn language by looking at our mouths. And that starts very young. I mean, by 1 year old, kids know 50 vocabulary words. By 5 years old, it's 1,500.
Wow.
Those vocabulary words are built through language and language through interaction. And I think the more opportunities we have with our kids to do those type of enriching activities, the better off our kids are and more prepared to really create a strong, I like to say, foundation and or anchor for the literacy skills and reading skills they'll start working on in school.
Okay, let's dig into that. So let's think specifically about early literacy. How do those research findings connect? So, for example, can screens actually support things like language development, vocabulary, or family reading routines? What are your thoughts on that?
I think intentional screen usage, well vetted by parents, and the type of programming you are exposing your kids to, first and foremost, is the most important. And that is after 2 years old. So like those toddler years. They also say if the vocabulary wants to be enriched, using a screen, watching good quality programming with your child can be beneficial, but it has to be co-viewed.
Mm-hmm.
I love, when we think about when we were younger, Sesame Street was really one of the first screen educational resources that parents had to use in their homes. And one of the things why it's still around is because most of those programs were co-viewed. My parents knew all the characters in Sesame Street. We talked about and sang the songs. That interaction back and forth between parent and child is what helped develop, especially Sesame Street, helped develop so many skills in kids. And that's one of the reasons why, because our parents also knew the songs, the characters, and would talk to us about them. That's the type of programming we want parents to expose to their kids in those toddler years. And another really great rule of thumb is that when we hand our kids tablets, iPads, anybody can create a children's app. Anybody. What we're asking parents is to use the apps that were created by nonprofits or websites that end in org, because those programs were specifically thought out, well intended, with your child's development in mind by educators, psychologists, all of these people who really care for your kids. And the best part, it's for free.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't have to pay for an app, because a lot of times we find the ones that we're paying for don't even meet the pillars of learning.
Yeah.
They just want to profit. So be mindful of that content.
Do you have any, I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any that you might suggest, or we could also add that to the notes at the end as well, if you have any that you recommend?
One, PBS Kids, the Sesame Streets, is it Tiger Tom? Is that another one? But really they're saying it's the nonprofit ones are the best, because they are not trying to profit off your kids, and they're really trying and to have really well-rounded, thought-out programming. And just kind of like Mr. Rogers. I always say to parents, think about the program Mr. Rogers. It took him 15 minutes just to tie his shoes. He was very thoughtful in that, because he wanted to go slow. He wanted to have a conversation. And that engagement piece was so important for kids in our generation. And now the programming that kids see is very fast. It wants to capture their attention. Lots of bells and whistles and candy grabs and rewards. It's a lot of that programming is based on a reward system, which hooks your child. We have to be very leery of some of those types of programs that we're exposing to our kids, because they really don't serve any educational benefit.
Well, especially when you're thinking about vocabulary, learning new words or terms or things like that. Like, for me, at least, I'm more of a slow processor. And so I don't do anything quickly. I don't. And so Ms. Rogers, like you're talking about, just the conversation, it's also calming, and there's space for processing. And that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned hooked. So when we think about digital literacy today, it's hard not to notice how screens are part of our everyday life, right? Not just for adults, for kids, for teenagers, for everyone. We see cell phones everywhere. I think about this a lot as a teacher. When I was first starting out, I remember being really aware. Oh, don't even respond to a text message, like you're teaching. But now that's not really the case. And so with that feeling of being hooked in early childhood, we know that screens, they need to be used thoughtfully. So some programs participating in Step Up to Quality, they might be using the environmental rating scales, the ERS, as a tool for evaluation. And this provides research-based guidance. The ERS reminds us, like you said, that screen time is not recommended for children under 2, and that for older children, it should generally be kept around 15 minutes and to make sure to be used intentionally. So from your perspective, what does intentional screen use look like? You've mentioned a little bit, but in an early childhood or an early learning setting, what would you say intentional screen look? And sorry about that. What intentional screen use looks like?
Well, I think from an early childhood standpoint, we're preparing our kids for school. And I think it's really interesting. I was talking to two of my very close friends, our kindergarten teachers, and I told them that I was doing this program with you. And I asked them, what do you wish parents knew about screen time and exposing their kids to screens before kindergarten? And they said, I wish parents knew that we rarely use screens. Either in kindergarten, first, maybe second grade, you're starting to use screens more often, but it's our jobs as parents to prepare them for kindergarten. So if they're not even using screens, do screens really serve a real value? Mm-hmm. What teachers are saying is, and what my friends were saying, we need students coming into kindergarten to developing the skills of their fine motor skills and holding a pencil, being able to use scissors, being able to pay attention to instructions, to follow directions, but most importantly, the social piece and to play.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are really important. It's not rocket science to swipe a screen. Why do you think that the creators of those things made it so easy? They wanted it to be incredibly accessible to even the youngest. Mm-hmm. And it is. And what teachers are trying, or at least my friends were trying to say, is that it doesn't mean they're not going to be behind when it comes to technology at all, because they need those foundational skills that they're going to get in play and social interaction and drawing and coloring. Those are the essential skills that they really need, not to be able to swipe or to play a game and get a reward system. So that really rang true to me. So if you are going to use any screens, that intentionality is really important. What is your goal? Is your goal really because you're going to put them behind a screen because you have to make dinner for 20, 30 minutes? I get it. No shame. As parents, we've all been there before. But just be mindful of the programming that you are going to show them. A lot of the programming that kids watch, they're getting short bits of things and not the whole picture. I was really, really interested in one research study that I read, is that kids now, they see the content that they're looking at is so fast that they never get the whole story. And a lot of times what used to teach kids morals and values and ethics and good guy, bad guy, that was all in a story, in a program. And parents used to talk about it. I mean, I'm going to date myself a lot right now, but Little House on the Prairie, right? Always had a moral of the story. Well, what happens when kids no longer watch content that they get the moral of the story?
Right.
And if they're not getting that from reading books, which always books have some type of meaning and moral of the story, where are we building our value system as a society? That's a whole nother conversation. But I think it's important because that's what screens have now opened up a world to our kids where they are taking in media much differently, in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very true. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot. But yeah, I'm thinking about, I think about the classrooms that I'm coaching, kindergarten, first grade, second grade classrooms right now. And there's a lot of brain break, active movements. And I have had conversations with teachers recently just to get them thinking about their own thinking. Go Noodle is fantastic. I used it as a teacher, but I'm wondering about, a read aloud or a quiet break, right? Not always so much stimulation. And that's just something that's been on my mind, because I think especially our kindergarten kiddos are pretty tired in the afternoon and they don't get a nap anymore. And so just
Yeah.
thinking about different types of screen time, right? So there's a difference between active screen time, like Go Noodle, or maybe an iPad activity, something movement related, and then passive screen time, like sitting and watching a series. So how do you see that difference play out in terms of supporting early literacy?
Well, for enrichment and an educational purpose, both active and passive screen time can have its benefits if it's co-viewed. If kids are just watching a video or playing a game that is not adapting, and that's the key word there, it's adapting to their developmental needs, and that's what co-viewing helps with, then it's not really serving a purpose. Because like I was saying earlier, kids interpret language from screens differently. They hear it, but it doesn't submit to memory, which I think is just incredibly interesting. So once again, the language hits their ears, but not their minds. We have to be mindful of that. So if we are using any types of screens in active or passive, make sure it's engaging. You're asking questions about it. And it's helpful if I think parents think about creating alternatives, healthy alternatives for their kids other than screens. Some parents have just given the kids the screens and then they don't have other choices. I think giving kids those other choices are really, really important, because it's just really hard in this day and age to be able to hand your kids a tablet or a screen and walk away and know 100% what they're viewing. We used to be able to do that with television. We used to be able to control that. We can't control that on an iPad or a tablet.
You have mentioned the co-viewing quite a bit. I think it'd be helpful, maybe not everyone is as familiar with that. So when adults and kids use screens together, but do you mind talking a bit about what co-viewing really is and what it isn't? It'd be great if parents maybe can think about how they could use that at home in ways that are supporting early literacy with their kids when using these digital resources.
Yeah. Co-viewing is viewing the same content and being interactive, asking questions. Saying, for example, let's say you're watching a program and there's a bully in it, and a parent could say, hey, what would you do in that situation? How would that make you feel? So you as the parent are also engaged in the content. It's not just you and your child sitting there together watching something and not saying anything. You could maybe not say anything during the program, but it's what happens afterwards, that engagement piece, in reiterating what the story was about. How did it make them feel? What did you think of this? That question and answer, that back and forth, is really important to develop those early vocabulary and language skills that once again go on to develop their literacy skills.
Okay.
The other thing too is that we just don't know. My good friend, Dr. Michael Rich, he's just awesome. He helped start the first digital wellness lab in Boston, Massachusetts. He's a Harvard professor, former film producer. He understands the power of screens and loves creativity, but he treats kids for problematic digital usage. And one of the things that he wrote this book called The Mediatrician. It's an excellent book. And he talks about how when we introduce kids to technology, we should treat it like a power tool, like literally a chainsaw. Would we ever just give a kid a chainsaw and walk away and expect him how to use it? No. So we would sit next to them like co-viewing does. We sit next to them. We teach them how to use the technology. And then as they start to grow older, we give them more freedoms and autonomy. And then once again, we let them loose. But it has to be step by step. And I think that co-viewing is part of that first initial step of introducing screens to your kids, doing it alongside them, being curious with them, knowing what they're looking at.
And then they know they can go to you when and if something happens that's scary or confusing, or, that they have you as a resource and they have established that relationship from the very beginning. That's so important.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been thinking a lot about the environment as well. So so I hear, oh, you should go on nature walks, but leave your phone at home, or, you do your yoga and leave your phone in the locker room or in the environment. I'm actually really motivated to have a no tech dinner party. That's on my list of things, where we put our phones in a basket and sure, we can have them maybe to take a picture of the gorgeous appetizer or something. But really, the idea is that we are here together and we are present. And so anyway, I'm going on a tangent, but I'm thinking about that, designated tech spaces or designated intentional no tech zones. What are your thoughts on that? Why does that matter? How can we do that? How can we create something like that at home and help children even just to identify how they feel when they use the phone or when they're near the phone, and how they feel when they're away from it. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. At Smart Gen Society, when we go out and educate parents, we talk about creating a home that is conducive to living in a digital world and creating spaces that are tech free. So, for example, as a family, from early on, commit to the fact that when we eat dinner together, that's going to be a tech-free space for us. And once again, we know how much interaction goes on. I mean, Laura, have you noticed in years recently when you go out to eat how many families are glued to their phones?
Mm-hmm.
And those are opportunities for that rich engagement that we think that maybe those phones are taking the place of. The other thing is, if you can do one thing to really benefit your kids' health, never allow a screen in your kid's bedroom.
Mm.
There's just too many things that we now know when it comes to the accessibility and the inability for screens to be able to block certain content that is not developmentally appropriate for kids. We don't want them doing those or seeing those things behind a closed door.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we say, when you set up your home to live in a digital age, have spaces in your home that you do use technology. Like, is it, in certain areas, like when they're doing their homework, you can use your technology. Or if you're doing your, if you're giving your kids certain amount of time to do social media, hey, we're going to do those in open spaces, especially gaming. A lot of parents allowed their kids, because gaming can be really loud and obnoxious, because the kids, I mean, they are engaged. It's very interactive. Parents started to allow their kids go into their own bedrooms and game. And what we realize now is that they were talking to people that they shouldn't have been talking to.
Right.
And so create those spaces in your homes. And another thing that I think is so important, Laura, besides mealtime, is the car. Car rides are such a great way to talk to your kids and to have really tough conversations. You're both looking straight forward. You don't have to look at each other in the eye. There's a lot of kids who wouldn't talk to you about certain things if they have to look at you in the eye. But even if that space is quiet, it's okay. I don't think that, our kids need to be entertained by a screen for a short car ride, because once again, we're missing that opportunity for really rich engagement to talk with our kids. So those are just a few suggestions that we make to parents on creating kind of those tech-free zones. But we know, once again, the most important is their bedrooms. We know that the American Academy of Pediatrics also has sleep recommendations that studies are showing that screen time is intervening with kids getting the appropriate amount of sleep that they need for their school day. And I kid you not, I probably was able to we were able to educate almost 30,000 kids last year at SmartGen. And I had a kindergarten class who told me their teacher's eyeballs about popped out of their head because they were so shocked. They said that they take their iPads and they hide them underneath their mattress.
No.
And then when their parents go to bed, they get it out. I mean, that just goes to show how addicted these devices are too.
Yeah.
But teachers are also telling us that their kids, that their students have never been more sleep deprived. And that could be one of the reasons why, is because they're staying up late at night, scrolling and on their screens.
In my own habits, I've read that an hour before bed, it's best to put screens away. And I've noticed a huge difference. I've started to read a book or Kindle, but that's not the same type of light. And I notice it so dramatically in just the quality of sleep. And so I imagine it's probably even more important for our youngest ones who need extra sleep. So
absolutely.
Our listeners, many of our listeners are providers. And so is there any way that you might, I don't know, how do you start this conversation, or how do you suggest that our providers and families can be intentional with their own tech use around children? It's just such a complicated conversation. And we don't want to overstep or induce any type of shame, but what do you think?
I like to use the analogy when I go out and talk is that I was one of 6 kids. My parents were awesome. They gave us everything that we needed. And really, it wasn't much back in the day. We were latchkey kids. But they were great parents. But one thing they didn't do is they didn't put us in seatbelts. They didn't know. Didn't make them bad parents. They just didn't know. So I say that to students, and they are like shocked that my parents would do that, because the kids are so conditioned to put their seatbelt on now. And I say that to them because I say technology was kind of like the cars were when they first were created. We didn't know kids were being hurt. And then once the research came out, we changed the entire industry. Now cars are so safe. And I make kids give me examples of how cars are so safe. And they give me all these examples. And I said, technology or screens are a new type of technology, just like cars were considered a new type of technology. We're catching up with the safety factors. And now that's what we're trying to do now, is educate on that. It doesn't mean you're bad parents. It just means we didn't know. And now that the research is out, we just want to help facilitate that research, the best practice, the guidelines. But it doesn't make you a bad parent. We all are living in this. And we used to think it was hard enough to raise kids in the real world. And now we're having to raise them in a virtual world. Jonathan Haidt in the Anxious Generation book, he had said that he really felt that parents were over-parenting in the real world and under-parenting in the digital world, which could be one of the reasons why these national reading literacy scores are so low, is because we didn't know. We thought these apps were educating our kids. We thought that they were developing the skills that they needed. Well, now we know that that's probably not true. So what are we going to do to adapt? And we all want collectively to do what's best for our kids.
Right.
And I think that that's something that we can all agree with. Yeah.
These are great and important reminders. And I'm just excited to start this conversation. I think it's one of those things where we're constantly pivoting, we're constantly learning, and things are changing at a very rapid speed. So I feel like it's just so many important reminders. Could you share any digital tools or resources that you've already shared a few websites? I don't know if you anything that's especially effective for supporting early literacy in developmentally appropriate ways?
Yeah, Common Sense Media, they do a great job of vetting a lot of the programming when it comes to movies and apps and gaming consoles. Use that as a resource. The American Academy of Pediatrics also does a great job. interesting enough that the Federal Trade Commission right now on their government website has some suggestions that parents can use when it comes to setting and protecting your kids' privacy online. But the greatest tool to really teach your kids is what lies between their ears, and that's their own brains. And to communicate with them about the technology that we're using, how we want to use it intentionally, how you also as a parent want to protect them. Because there were so many things that we just didn't know that we do know now, and that's your job as a parent. But there are a lot of great resources. And then of course, what we do at Smart Gen, I love going out and educating kids. We have curriculum that's developed from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade that is specifically age and developmentally appropriate for those grades, talking about the things that kids are experiencing at that age online. A lot of kids don't know who to talk to about when things go wrong. And you know why they don't want to tell their parents? And they tell us this all the time. Why don't you think kids don't want to tell their parents when something goes wrong online? I'm sorry.
Because they don't want the iPad to be taken away.
Ding, 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 ding.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. They love it so much that they will endure the pain, the suffering, the content that they see that can be really scary. They will sit with that. When we talk about like screens, the onset of anxiety and depression and isolation has increased as the rise of kids' use of screens. Sometimes I think that another proponent, and the reason why that rise is so high, is because the exposure to content, that they don't know who to talk to about it. And then when we go and talk to kids, they tell us so much.
They have a lot to say.
Because they know I'm not taking their devices away, but they don't know who to talk to about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's really, really interesting. And gosh, we collect a lot of qualitative data, because then I take in what they say and then I go talk to the parents and I say, hey, this is coming from your children's mouths. And the parents are like, wow, we had no idea. That's why that communication piece, when it comes to screens, is so, so important. We want the kids to come to you first, to the parent, when something goes wrong.
And what about families or parents who are maybe aren't sure about technology, don't really know the ins and outs of what all's happening? Is there any advice that you'd share to help them feel more confident? Using it as a tool?
Yeah, it was interesting because Dr. Michael Rich talks about in his nutrition book about how if you don't expose your kids to any technology, that's not good either. They did a study of kids that went to college who grew up in zero tech homes. They flunked out of college. The majority of them flunked out of college right away, because you know what they were doing? Like binge watching programming 24/7 on their computers 24/7. So it's how we introduce it to them slowly with boundaries. We have to, I like that Dr. Michael Rich uses the 5 M's. We have to mentor our children as we introduce them to technology. We have to model the behavior that we want to see. Kids listen to 1% of what we say and 99% of what we do. And that comes to our screen behavior too. We have to monitor everything that they're doing online from the time that we introduce technology to them. And then we have to make more real life experiences for our kids. And then last, master the technology. Those are all parental advice to really feel like your kids can thrive in a digital age and not just survive. We don't want kids just to survive. We want them to thrive, but we want to expose slowly but surely, because it's part of all of our lives. Yeah.
Mentor, model, monitor, make more real life experiences, and master. My favorite is make more real life experiences. That's my favorite.
Mine too. Mine too. And sometimes we have to be intentional about that. Yeah.
I just
More
always
than-
think about, read alouds and the difference between reading. I mean, and again, I use certain sites for reading books for free. Whether that's sometimes as a teacher, I would use YouTube because there would be a great book that I didn't actually have physically. And there's ways to use it in productive ways. But
Yeah.
I just think a lot about read alouds and the way it feels to have nothing else going on and have my nephew in my lap or as a teacher in front of a group of kiddos and just really be present together and use voices and laugh and that joy. And there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. But it also requires intention. And I feel like this is just such a great topic. Before we wrap up, is there anything that we forgot? Did we not cover anything or any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our early childhood providers, educators, and parents?
Gosh, you know what? There was this just this one study that I found so profound about. I went to a speaker from Sesame Street, and it was the study where the parents had to teach their kids 5 vocabulary words, the same vocabulary words. But the conditions were the same, except in the experimental group, they had the mom's cell phone. She went to grab the cell phone and texted on it and then came back with the child. That group was less likely to teach the kids the 5 vocabulary words because they broke that social contract.
The bond. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was mind-blowing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like that time that we do spend with our kids, that one-on-one, uninterrupted. And I think technology, one of the things that continues to do, Laura, it's distracting and it's disrupting. And so how do we create environments in our home for less distraction and less disruption?
Yeah, that is great. That's good. Suzie, I always end up with the same question. It's one of my favorites. So do you have a favorite children's book or a special read aloud moment that stands out in your memory? I promise you, this is my last question.
Oh my God, no. I love this question, Laura. And honestly, when I was looking through the questions before we talked today, it brought a tear to my eye because it triggered so much emotion out of me. The book is The Monster at the End of this book.
Uh-huh.
And I remember reading that to my kids, and people used to make fun of me because I was a drama major too. So I would just get so animated and the kids would really think that, oh my gosh, here he comes. And I just how much joy that brought to my heart reading to my kids. And they would want me to read it over and over and over again, even though they knew that Grover was the monster at the end of the book, the lovable, huggable. They loved that interaction the entire time. So yeah.
I love it. That's a great book. We have that. We bought a new copy of that for Ishmael, my nephew, and it never gets old, honestly.
No. Reading is one of my favorite memories of all of my 3 children's childhood, that time.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Laura, I am honored to be a guest. So honored.
I just appreciate you sharing your insight and, having the hard conversation, because it's something that can be hard to talk about. And it's just really helpful to have your insight and ideas. So thank you.
You're welcome. You are very welcome.
So thank you, Suzie. You've helped us see how early literacy and digital literacy can go hand in hand when we use our screens thoughtfully, with intention, and always with children's development at the center. To our listeners, thank you again. Thank you for tuning in to Quality Time. We hope today's episode gave you some fresh ideas and practical strategies for weaving technology into your literacy work in meaningful ways. Be sure to join us next time as we continue celebrating Nebraska's amazing early childhood professionals who are stepping up to quality every day. Until then, bye-bye.